the song that she's going to sing to close us out today, which is the German song Erika. She said she's very rusty on it. I think she thinks she's muted. And so she wanted to turn off her camera and practice her Erika. So we're going to use that as our entry music. How about that? I have a whole great big band song set up, but one more time, Irmgard.
Did you hear it?
Yes, we did. We loved it. We loved it. I know you thought you were muted, but we were enjoying it.
You son of a gun, you cheated on me. You're like a cheating husband.
Sorry, I know that was a dirty trick. It was a dirty trick, but it was so good. We loved it.
It's very hard for me. I have just not done that.
I know.
An octave higher and singing an octave lower. I'm lucky I know what an octave is.
Well, no, I mean, we could have muted you if we wanted, but we enjoyed it. So I'll play the big band song and we'll let everybody in. Let's start up the program here. Here we go. In the waiting room on the Zoom side, thank you so much for joining us for our Greatest Generation Live. This is a production of the Veterans Breakfast Club. I'm Todd Deep. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and this is one of the 3 live programs per week that we have. Greatest Generation Live on Sunday afternoon, and then we have Veterans Breakfast Club Happy Hour on Monday evenings, and then we have our Veterans Breakfast Club virtual breakfast on Wednesday mornings at 9 o'clock. And today is the one day that we really focus on World War II stories and veterans. And today I see we have a number of World War II veterans with us. So we have Julia Parsons. Hello, Julia.
Hello.
And
nice
we
to
have
be
Jack
here.
Watson, Marines. Hello, Jack. Good to see you. And then we have Irmgard Ryan, who grew up in Germany as a teenager in World War II and has quite a story to tell. She ended up marrying an American GI and moving to the U.S. And she's going to be our featured guest today. But before we get to her, and I see Rick the Jeep guy is with us. Hello, Rick. Good to see you. Usually you don't have a camera, but your camera fell a little bit. You can tell he's a Vietnam veteran. We have John Ferguson. Hello, John, and Ben, and Jeff is back with us. And are you back from San Antonio, Jeff?
That's right. You just got in Thursday.
Just got in. Okay, you're back home. Good. We have Ken, who I saw yesterday at Kathy Swazuk's funeral, which was wonderful. And Chad Riddle. How are you? Jack, are you saying something here?
I'm doing well.
Good, very good. And Dana Del Bianco, and Dan and Cheryl Vaughn are the people you can't see because they put their thumb up against the camera like that or something like that. So, but I know they're there. I saw them yesterday too. It was wonderful to see them at Kathy Swazuk's funeral. But before we get to Irmgard Ryan, our featured speaker, I'd love to have 2 sisters. This is Jan and Carole. Carole Popchock. Hello, Carole, and Jan Korenich. Hi, Jan. Thank you for joining us and being willing to join our conversation here. You're not World War II veterans, but your father was a World War II veteran, and with quite a story. And I thought I would just show his image right here. I love this picture because, Jan, I don't know if I said this to Carole. She didn't seem to react very much to it. But your dad was kind of like a cross between Robert Mitchum and Cary Grant.
Well, I can't say we ever thought of him that way. He was just dad.
But he has a kind of a rugged movie star kind of look about him. in this photo. Do you agree, Carol, or am I way off base?
Yeah, I think he's a very handsome guy in those army pictures. Absolutely.
And you know, he's interesting to me for a couple reasons. Number one, he joined the Army in 1938. He left in 1945. He was in the Army for 7 years. So he's in the pre-Pearl Harbor Army. He was in the 1st Infantry Division. He was a first sergeant in the 1st Infantry Division, landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, you know, fought in the Normandy campaign, fought in North Africa, received a Silver Star in North Africa for valor. And so he's interesting in his experiences in World War II. But he's also interesting to me, and this is the painful part of your story and his story. And I'm going to be frank, and you could correct me if you want. He was a deadbeat dad. He left the family, and he didn't have a relationship with you. I think it's absolutely connected to the war. Just from the evidence that you've kind of shared with me and what I've picked up in the wonderful 2 hours of audio interview with him that you shared with me, you could tell that he was very much traumatized by his war experience, and that trauma has kind of reverberated through your family. Am I overstating that?
Yeah, Todd, when you had used that phrase in correspondence with me that our dad was a deadbeat dad, I really had a kind of visceral reaction to that, because that's not how I think we ever thought of him. At one time he was there, and then he was gone. And for a very long time, for decades, we didn't know where he was or, you know, what his life was. As we found out more about that, my sister Jan and I took particular interest in trying to figure out what led up to it. And we certainly came to the conclusion that now we had the language for it, it was PTSD. But I don't think we ever thought of him as a deadbeat dad. He was just gone.
He was just gone.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when he left, Carol?
I was about 10, maybe going on 11.
Okay, so that's old enough to be very bonded with him as your father. And yeah. I mean, it wasn't like you don't have memories of him.
Absolutely.
Jan, how old were you?
I was a sophomore in high school.
Oh boy. Mm-hmm. And was there always a mystery as a child as to what happened to Dad, where he went?
Yeah, we did not have any idea where he had gone. My parents had separated, and were separated for about a year before he just left.
He left.
So he was in the area for a year, although he was not in our home.
Were there signs, looking back now, when you were children, when he was around, before your parents separated, were there signs looking back that he probably had PTSD or, you know, what they called battle fatigue?
Looking at it now, looking back on it now, oh yes. As a child, would I have been able to tell you that? No.
No. But what kind of behavior, looking back now, do you see as kind of hallmarks of his PTSD?
I think part of it was his struggle to be a bit more successful financially. And there were always issues around that. And I think probably there was a level of depression.
Yeah.
That again, as a child, I could not, have diagnosed that for you or told you, you know, that that's what it was. Because he really, the five of us have talked about it quite a bit. And he really did not talk about his experiences. He talked about the 1st Division, the Big Red One, because he was so proud of having served with the Big Red One. Talked about his training in Lake Placid.
Love it.
Ski Patrol.
Love it.
Talked about a lot about his time. Well, not a lot, but talked about his time in England when they were preparing
Right.
for Normandy.
Mhm.
But that was really the extent of it. I knew he had medals because there was a box that was kept in the one desk drawer that had his medals in it. But I had no idea why he had medals, or, that was not discussed, with us.
And we
And
should let
Todd,
people know his
other
name was
way-
Tom Korenich, or Thomas J. Korenich.
Cornick.
Cornish.
Two syllables, Cornick.
Cornick. Okay.
Cornick. Like a hard K sound.
Yep.
We really didn't know. I mean, I certainly didn't know about the Silver Star until my late husband started doing the family military history research and, sent for Dad's records and found the citation.
I can't believe that you didn't know about the Silver Star. The
Never
Silver
knew about the
Star
Silver
is a
Star.
major award.
Nope, was never. I mean, I'm sure, my mother knew, my aunts and uncles knew. As far as children went, we were not, it wasn't shared with us. We've also talked about the fact that it was a different time, and things weren't as out there as they are now. There was no
more privacy.
People weren't putting everything on an internet, for the world to see, and it was just that was a family, family matter. But it wasn't. Kids weren't. There were things that were considered adult and things that were considered children. And you did not mix the two. We've often talked about, we have a couple of in-law relatives that were really wing-dingers that we didn't know about till we were, in our 20s. As adults, things came to light. So it was just different that those kinds of things, I don't know, were necessarily discussed with children. And I don't think we had the knowledge to ask about it.
Right. I like this press clipping. It says, there's a silver star on Cornick's chest among the many campaign ribbons. He doesn't talk about it, except to say that he must have been crazy when he won it. And he won it for...
Todd, as I shared with you, the citation, describes a rather heroic act of going and rescuing this guy in the middle of the desert. But it makes it sound even easier than it was. My dad and 4 guys in a litter crawled on their bellies for miles to get to and from this guy and saved him. And the absolutely sad part of the story is they saved this guy's life in the Northern Campaign, and he died on D-Day in Normandy.
Yes, he died on D-Day. They saved him in North Africa, and he died in Normandy, in the Normandy campaign on D-Day. He was an officer.
Yes,
he was Tom Cornick's officer. Your dad saw so much action. He was wounded in Normandy.
Yes.
One little mystery of him is why he came home in 1944. Do you know the story?
I think I have it. I'm starting to piece it together. And, some of it comes from his reminiscences on the tape that I sent you. But it was an accumulation of things. First of all, an older brother had been killed in Anzio a couple of months before D-Day. There were 3 other brothers who were now also in the war. And, his father had died just before, all hell broke loose in World War II for the Americans. So his dad was gone. His oldest brother was gone. 3 other brothers were serving in other parts of the war. And I think that had something to do with it. Dad had been in the Army so long, and I don't understand the point system, but there's reference to he had accumulated lots of points, and that meant, going home. But he also talks about how towards the end, they've landed at Normandy Beach, they've pushed in through Saint-Lô, they've moved southeast from Saint Lô to Mayenne, and things kind of grind to a halt at Mayenne. So they push on from Mayenne towards Orléans. And somewhere in there, I think, was when my dad had reached his, I think what they call in 12 o'clock high, maximum effort. Somebody observed something wasn't right, including he had lost about 50 or 60 pounds over a period of time. And I think it references even in that article that his body had overexposure to combat. And that's why he was sent home to convalesce.
He had overexposure to combat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was, I mean, combat fatigue or battle fatigue was extremely common. Everybody reached a point of battle fatigue. It was just a matter of when, and certainly your dad had seen enough to have reached that point. I do want to share my screen again just to show a picture of him, because I love these pictures of these American soldiers before Pearl Harbor, when they had the British style soup bowl helmets. And there he is. Did you ever get a story about why your dad joined the Army in 1938?
As far as I know, and Jan can comment on this too, my dad always spoke highly of military service. He loved the Army. He graduated from high school and joined the Army. So I think he was planning to make it a career. I don't think he was planning on being in a world war, but I think he was planning on, the military being his career.
Yes.
So I think that first picture you showed must have been maybe his first year, at camp, because they're wearing sort of World War I style uniforms.
Yes, right. I love it. And here's just some other very wonderful early pictures. You see the leggings that they used to wear early in the war. And this is really fantastic because in 1940, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, a tiny country with a tiny army, and Finland successfully held off the Red Army because of its ski troops. Finland, I believe, was the only country with ski troops, where all white. They actually fought on skis, and it inspired the U.S. Army to try and experiment with ski troops in 1940, 1941, and a regiment of the 1st Infantry Division was used for this experiment. They weren't actually trained to go into combat. It was just to see, can we train these guys, to hold rifles and ski? People who had never skied before, can we train them to ski and fight? And it worked. It did work. They trained at Lake Placid. It was I believe it was cut short because of a lack of snow, but they trained for maybe 8 weeks or so at Lake Placid, and your dad was one of them. There's this picture.
Yes.
Tommy, one of them. I love this. They were really these were the first ski troops. This is before the 10th Mountain Division. The 10th Mountain Division was created to actually do fighting, an invasion in Norway that never happened. They ended up being sent to Italy. But it's one of the many fascinating things about your father's story.
But Todd, you know what? My father never said, "Hey, let's go skiing." I mean, as far as I know, he never skied again. Jan, did you know he ever skied again?
He was a, north side of Pittsburgh kid. I don't think he had ever skied in his life before that. He did. He was a swimmer. He was a boxer, played baseball. I mean, he was very athletic, but I don't think skiing was in the picture.
Yeah, no. But I mean, just such great stuff. And you said he was a boxer. Here he is, boxing in the Army, TK on his shorts there. He's a catcher in baseball. He's a basketball player. And I love that they wore knee pads to play basketball. You have such a wonderful collection of things. And I do want to have you kind of back on to talk more about him, and especially as you discover more and more about him. This is a map of kind of where he went, and he comes from an interesting family too. Here is a pay. Look at this pay. So he's $10,000 worth of life insurance. This is 1940, which is standard.
43.
Right,
It's
43.
43.
The allotment, he has $40 allotment sent to, I don't know, he wasn't married then, correct?
No, that was his mother.
So his mother, $40 a month.
His mother.
So he nets out $37.50 a month. You can have a lot of fun with $37.50.
At that time.
That time. I just love it. It's just such a great, and this should be a treasure document.
It is.
This is signed by Theodore Roosevelt Jr., whom your father worshipped. I mean, really worshipped. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was a Medal of Honor recipient for his actions on D-Day, and he was the former president's son. He ended up dying during the war. He was in his 50s, late 50s during the war, and was considered one of a great combat commander, truly great. And your dad thought the world of him, and always thought. Your dad said something like in the interviews that he was too good. That's why he was not promoted as high as he should have been.
Dad had a very interesting view on the military system, as you heard, Todd. And he felt that a lot of good guys got overlooked because they didn't play the system.
Yeah.
And TR Jr. was one of those that he thought deserved much higher rank than he ever achieved, and much more credit for what he accomplished in the field of battle. The one thing my dad is especially proud of, and I'm coming to appreciate this more the more research I do, is he comments on every objective that the 1st Division was given, they achieved. So it wasn't, I mean, it might not have been with the first effort, it was eventually. And he said, and if the first guys didn't accomplish it, the second wave was there, to see it through, but we got all of our objectives met. And he said, I don't know if that can be said of any other division in World War II, but the 1st Division always met its objectives. And I think that's something he was especially proud of, and that he in part attributed to the leadership of people like Omar Bradley, whom he adored.
He adored Omar.
Because
Omar Bradley.
Bradley was the GI general, and my dad really loved the GI.
Terry Allen, I think your dad and
Terry
everybody
Allen.
loved Joe Stillwell. Your dad was he liked the real authentic combat leaders, not the martinettes.
He talks about a conversation when he and I guess other soldiers met Omar Bradley, and Bradley confided in them that what haunts him is the knowledge that he sends young men to their death. And that stuck with my dad, and he respected that. That he would be haunted by that. And I think it's fair to say my dad was haunted by things he had seen in battle.
Oh, gosh, yes. How could he not have been?
Yeah.
He saw so much, Carole. And Carole and Jan, I do want to maybe at another, at a breakfast or something, play little snippets from the interviews and have you talk a little bit more about the remarkable family he came from. Here is a picture of your poor grandmother, who sent 5 boys into service in World War II. One, Joe, did not come home. He was killed.
Right.
And there is his picture on the mantle.
Right.
Did you know your grandmother very well?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
So even after my dad left, there was never a distinction, well, my son and he's no longer here, so adios to you, kind of thing.
Right.
No, we were very close to both sides of the family.
Good.
Uncles, aunts, cousins. She was a quiet person. And I think part of what happened during the war with her oldest son contributed to that. I think she got quieter, after that. I mean, she was never like, I had my two grandmothers. One was like the party person of the year, my mother's mother. Give her a party and she was there.
Right.
Grandma Cornick was quiet. You always knew she loved you, but she was just very quiet about it.
Yeah.
There's a passage in my dad's recollections where he gets word that Uncle Joe has been killed in Anzio in the last artillery barrage from the Nazis, and he's worried about his mom, and one of his siblings has written and told him that mom just sits in the chair and stares. And it's funny that the first time I heard that description, that's how I would have described my grandma Cornick.
Yeah.
She was quiet, and I remember her sitting in a chair, and it was that 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah.
And you always wondered what's on her mind, what is she thinking about? And I think I have, better feel for that now. She was the mother of 10. So, she didn't have a lot of time to mourn because she still had 3 or 4 young children at home. But losing your firstborn, I don't know how you ever get over that.
You don't. I mean, you don't. I don't think you do. Ken Rozicki, why don't you ask the question that you put in the chat here? Because I think it's a good one.
I just wanted to ask Carole and Janet, since he won the Silver Star, that qualifies him for inclusion on the Wall of Honor at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall. Do you know, is his name included there?
Oh yeah, he was inducted in October of 2000. Well, again, that was something my husband helped initiate, but yes, that was done in October of 2000.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks
Sure.
for asking, Ken.
And, I would love to have you on again to talk more about your dad, but can I ask you before you go, do you have do you learning about your dad's World War II experience kind of help with, and I'll use the word trauma, help with the trauma, the childhood trauma of, losing your father in such a way, being abandoned by your father?
Jan, I'll let you go first on this.
Oh, I think it definitely did. And I think, again, the 5 of us talking, it impacted each of us differently.
Yeah.
Because we were at different ages. My youngest brother was in kindergarten. So, it ran from a sophomore in high school to a kindergartner. So my experiences with my dad were certainly different. My memories were certainly different than my youngest brother's memories with my dad, because he wasn't there, he didn't have as many memories as I had.
Right.
And I think we have definitely, I think the 5 of us
Over here.
have definitely come to accept that there was a lot of PTSD involved in all of this.
Right.
And I think that takes away the almost that there was, like, at some levels, not an ability to control it.
Yeah. An explanation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about you, Carole?
I think for me, it's been revelatory and it's been healing because, as some of you know from previous conversations, my late husband was a military historian. So I've lived with a lot of soldier stories most of my adult life. I've visited almost every major US battlefield from the Revolution, from the French and Indian Wars, through the Civil Wars. So I have come to appreciate what those experiences do to any soldier, and why wouldn't it happen to my dad?
Yeah.
But now that I'm discovering more and researching more, I'm getting other insights. And I'm going to share one with you that might be a little unexpected, but it kind of hit me over the head when I was listening to his recording again. I honestly have to say that I'm proud of my dad making a statement that when you're in combat, the religion, race, neighborhood, anything like that of the guy next to you makes no difference. And if it doesn't make any difference in combat, why should it make any difference anyplace else? So I can tell you this much. Growing up, I never heard a racial slur in our household. I never heard a curse word in our household. Our household, for being that, we were raised in part by a guy who had been at every D-Day there was in World War II, was genteel. and respectful. And that's something that I'm extremely proud of. And I think that's something my dad maybe learned in childhood, in the neighborhoods he grew up in, but I think he also had it reinforced in combat.
Yes.
And that was something that was passed on to us that was very good.
Yes. Yes. There's so much that's in those interviews with your dad. There's such character there. And there's such, and you and I had a private conversation about this. There's such intelligence there also. He's clearly such a smart man. Not necessarily, formally educated in
Right.
school, but really smart, really insightful, very honest, authentic, direct, compassionate. You hear the compassion. You also hear the passion about, yes, he talks about that, race and religion, don't matter on the battlefield. And that was an important lesson he learned. Boy, he doesn't like the French.
Oh man.
That was very, very fun to
He
listen
has
to.
a lot
And
of
there's-
but Todd, just to bring it to one military point, a theme that goes throughout that conversation that my father has is he understood the importance of planning, that you plan things before you knocked on the door of a cottage in the little French village.
Yes.
You have a plan. And I think it really riled him, the slaughter in the North African campaign, because the French went into it headstrong with no planning and with little materiel to back up, the bluster.
Yes.
And I think that really bothered him, that it was not well planned.
Oh yeah.
On their part.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing just a little bit of your father's story and of your story, as members of a Blue Star family.
Mhm.
And we had on Monday night, we had a program dedicated to Gold Star families, Blue Star families. And you could hear how when one person enters the military, the whole family does, in a sense, and how that kind of experience of military service, of combat trauma, does kind of reverberate through a family and can do so for generations. And it just seems like your family is just so instructive, and you're so generous to be able to kind of share that story with us.
Just one other thought on that, and it might seem bizarre, but I've been reflecting on this, and I think every adult male that I knew as a child, every uncle on both sides of the family, every male cousin who was of age was in military service in World War II. So how could you not be affected by it? How could a whole community not be affected by it? So yeah, we didn't take it as being extraordinary because it was so common.
Amen. And early on in the Veterans Breakfast Club, I remember, hearing these just amazing stories from these vets, and they would say that they had never told their families, they had never talked about it before. And I would ask them why. And a couple vets early on said, like in the 1950s, we all had these stories. And if we started to tell them, we were never going to stop. We would never get anything done. That just like the stories, they were, a dime a dozen. Everybody living around you had an amazing war story. And so you just didn't even open up that box, because it would you'd never, be able to close it back up. So this is great. Carole, Jan, I hope you'll join us again sometime and talk more, because there are more pictures and documents I do want to share, and more of his story. And I also I'm working on getting some clips from that interview with him, and playing them, and then having you reflect and talk about them.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Carole. Thank you, Jan. I want to turn to Irmgard now. Hello, Irmgard. I'm going to unmute you. Hello, Irmgard.
Hello.
Hey, Irmgard was practicing the song that she's going to play for us at the end of our program, a song called Erica, and she'll explain it. And she failed to mute as she was practicing before the show. And so we let it go out onto the Facebook Live side, and it was great. It was really, so I'm looking forward to hearing that, Irmgard. But I want to introduce you a little bit. Irma Ryan, also known as Irmgard Fiederling, grew up in Germany, in southern Germany in World War II. And so she kind of lived through the war as a very young woman. And I thought I would start just by asking her first, kind of what she remembers about the beginning of the war, which was, 81 years ago on September 1st, September 1st, 1939. And I'll share a picture of Irmgard. Irmgard Fiederling, also known as Irma Ryan. You were a little cutie.
I don't know. I remember that apron I'm wearing there. It's really an apron, but it may look like a dress to you. It was home sewn by a lady in a village that my mother hired once a year to come to the house. And that was new material, which we eventually couldn't get anymore. We sewed stuff out of old blankets, bed sheets, towels, whatever we had. But that dress, I called it, I was so proud of it. It had buttons all the way down the back. I remember it. I loved it. Yeah, that was my first day school dress. And over here, I must be about 3 years old. And I remember nothing about my life then. But the picture I cropped this one out of was my dad's mom had one of my brothers in a baby buggy, and I walked alongside. But I remember nothing of it. I have no memories of much before my school days.
Irma grew up in a small village, a rural village of mostly farmers in Bavaria, correct?
Yes.
Irma, in southern Germany. The closest city was Würzburg.
Würzburg, yes.
Würzburg was the closest city. So you grew up in Bavaria, which was really the home of National Socialism, or maybe one of the birthplaces of National Socialism in Germany. And how old were you? And I know this is giving away your age, but September 1st, 1939, what's your memory of that day, and how old were you? This is the day that Germany invaded Poland and began World War II.
I'm born in 28, so I must have been 11 if I can.
There we go. Okay, so you're 11 years old.
And war meant nothing to me. The word war, I only knew some people were fighting, but I remember that night, the night before September 1, somebody was out there throwing stones against the house at 5 a.m. And I crawled out of my bed and looked out the window, and my school teacher stood down there. And he said, Fiederling, you are drafted. You got to get up. You're drafted. I didn't know what drafted meant, but that teacher had a nervous condition because he had 8 classes in one classroom. That means first, second, third through 8th class. One classroom, 37 kids, one teacher.
That'll give you a nervous condition.
Went a little. So I thought he had a really serious attack. And so did my dad. When he finally opened up the window and looked out, he said, oh, go home. You didn't sleep well last night. You're confused. He said, no, I have the orders here. The orders, you're drafted. We're at war with Poland. Well, it hadn't been declared. Nobody knew we were at war. And he came and drafted my dad, who was 36 years old, had 6 kids, was eventually the oldest man serving in the war out of the village, and drafted first. Well, my dad had to grab a bus. He was working with 2 buses, making a living for 2 families. He had to take 1 bus and leave. And that was my first serious impression, sort of what war could do to you.
So your father was an independent bus driver, and he had 2 buses, right? And he
Yes.
shuttled back and forth between towns,
Würzburg, yeah.
Würzburg and your village. And so when he was drafted, they also said, you're drafted and bring one of your buses too.
Yes, the bus goes. And we were never reimbursed. We never got a penny. He took it. We eventually knew that my dad wound up with a bus in France, on the French border. The bus got shot up to pieces. My dad didn't tell us about. I do not know where or what happened to the bus, if he ever drove it in wartime or in the war zones. But much later, when I understood a little more, people started to talk in the village, and they said, you know, your dad was never for Hitler. And I said, well, we just never discussed politics in our house. I don't know. No, he was not for Hitler. I said, well, I never heard him say anything for or against Hitler in the house. But he was known in the village. There were 2 men. My dad was one of them, and he had a friend at the way out the end of the village. And my dad had a big friendship in that household and took me often there. Those 2 men were considered, the village folks called them communists. But I don't even know if anybody, I guess you were called a communist if you were not a Hitlerite.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that was it.
Now your dad went into the army, he gets drafted. Does he come home on furlough? Do you see him again?
Oh yes, he comes home on furloughs. Once, the first time, I remember he came home when he got out of training. But he never talked what he did or where he was. He was in Deggendorf. That's where he was trained for whatever he had to do eventually in the war. He came home, and he came home more at times. But once he was actually on the battlefield, especially when he was switched from the Western Front to the Eastern Front. By that time, the Eastern Front had progressed into Russia, was no longer just Poland, it was Russia. My dad wound up the last several years of the war to be in Russia.
And I mean, just to, let everybody know, he eventually gets captured by the Red Army. He becomes a POW, and he returns home in 1949.
Yes.
So think about that.
4 years after the war. We did not know for quite a few years if my dad was alive after the war or if he was not. So we sought out returnees from camps from Russia. We eventually got a letter or a few letters out of Russia. We knew he was in Russia. Strangely enough, we could only figure it out that my mother's letters to him, he never seemed to get. Because she could only write in the old Gothic language. She couldn't write in Latin, which Hitler brought in. We all had to learn. I learned just to read and write Gothic. Eventually, we had to write the Latin letters. And I wrote to my dad in Latin letters, and he got my letters, heavily censored, but my letters went through to Russia. We didn't know where he was in Russia. How long, nothing. Just we knew he was alive in Russia. So we searched for people that came back from Russia out of prison camps. And somebody said, we showed pictures. We always took my dad's picture. Did you see this man? And there was a restaurant owner about 25 kilometers away from my little village. He came from Russia. We went over and he said, there was a guy in camp. I think that was your dad. I don't know his name, but he looks like your dad. Then we thought, why is he not home after the war? 45. Why? Then the letter sort of died off or got to be less until one day, it was the end of 49. I saw a man coming down the street. I could look out, was towel drying my hair because I'd gotten wet out in the rain. And I read off of the neighbor's mouth. He stopped and he looked and he went, Fiederling. I thought he said Fiederling. I couldn't hear, but just by the expression, I took my towel, wrapped it around my hair, ran outside, and 100 feet down the street in the main area of the village stood a group of people. I worked my way through and my dad was in the middle. And he had lost half of his weight. He weighed the same I weighed. I was 11 when he left. I was 21 then. And I just remember I was hanging on his neck, crying profusely. And I remember my mom was visiting and my neighbor, she almost lived over there. She loved my neighbor's house. She was looking out of the window, who is that, whatever she thought. And when she saw me hanging on this man's neck, she figured, oh my gosh, I think that's my husband. And from then on, I don't remember what happened the rest of that day. I can't remember. It was just unbelievably emotional. And
Yeah, so
village,
I just want to emphasize to the viewers that your dad was drafted in 1939 at the very beginning of World War II. He's taken prisoner and he comes home in 1949, 10 years away from home. Boy, oh boy, is that a Jeff? Yes.
Grüß Gott, Irmgard. I just say that because that's the greeting in southern Germany, and they say Guten Tag in northern Germany. The Grüß Gott is what they say in southern Germany. If I'm not correct, Irmgard.
yes.
But I was going to ask you, the thing that's ironic about this conversation, I know exactly where you're from. I was in Würzburg 3 years in Germany with the 3rd Infantry Division, and that was 83 to 86. And I was going to ask you what the name of your village was.
Roden, Roden.
Okay,
When you
Roden.
took the Hauptstraße 8, you got
Okay.
to Markteidenfeld on the Main River.
Okay.
We were 7 kilometers up, 2 kilometers up, 5 kilometers up the Main River. Then we turned right. By that time you were in Rodenfeld, so Zimmern. We went to the right, and 2 more kilometers up was my little village, Roden. No major street connection. However, the streets were tarred. You
I
could
see.
get through there.
I have a
Okay.
feeling if we went to Roden today and you just said Irmgard Fiederling, they would still be talking about you, Irma.
Yes, everybody knows me. Little kids. I remember I was home with my husband one time, and my husband wanted a bottle of schnapps. There was a man in a village who made his own schnapps out of prunes. We wanted prune schnapps. And there was a whole group of people. As soon as people would see me, they gathered around me. And I was surrounded. There was this kid, and I gave him a couple of marks, whatever. I said, would you go and get me a bottle of schnapps for my husband? And he looked at me and I said, you don't know who I am, do you? And he said, oh yeah, you are the Fiederlings Irmgard. was a little kid, wasn't born when I was home.
I was gonna say, Todd and Irmgard, that area where you lived in that after the war, after the 3rd Infantry moved into our area down by Würzburg, that sector was 3rd Infantry of the U.S. Army. The sister unit where your village was, that was 12 Panzer, the 12 Panzer German Panzer Division. That was the main sector. The 12 Panzers were there, and that was our sister unit. And we always trained with them. And it's interesting, just aside for everyone, that in southern Germany there, where the 3rd Infantry was, as you got further and further east towards the border, we were always on the border, the East-West German border. I mean, everybody got friendlier and friendlier with the Americans. And the reason why Würzburg had a great reputation and great camaraderie with the Firstburgers was the fact that during the war, the Brits came through and they bombed Würzburg. And about 2 days later, after the bombing, the 3rd Infantry Division moved in. And in the division, they had, like in each battalion, they had like a special officer that his job was to save all the artifacts. And his job, he was always propping up the frescoes, the ceilings in the cathedrals, and all these kind of things. And the Americans came in and saved all these different buildings. The residence, you've probably been there at Würzburg, the residence, which is the big home of the Prince Bishop way back in the 18th century. And that was all saved by the Americans. And so we had a very great relationship with Würzburg.
Irmgard, I'm sorry, Irmgard. I want to, you talked about your father. I want to ask, how did your life change during the war? I imagine it probably took a while for all the changes to sink in. What happened to you and your family?
You know, there were no great big changes that affected me deeply. My dad was gone every day of the week, on the bus, out, trying to make money, because there was another family, a woman with 7 kids who lived off of the earnings from this bus. They owned a business together. No papers were ever signed. But my mother having to raise, eventually we were 6 teenagers, because we were only about a year apart, born. So if my dad would have come home a few times more often, we would have had more kids, probably. Every time my dad saw my mother, she was pregnant. So, and I heard at night my mom complaining about it. I'm the only one in a village walking around with a big belly. And I didn't, as a little kid, I didn't know what that meant, but I told myself, I'm not going to walk around the village with a big belly when I grow up. I remember that. It's just, but when you see me in distress, I already knew what a big belly meant in those days, and I had a lot of the boys my age, they were all too young. We were only 3 boys in my class. One boy was born just a little off, in the head, big, tall boy, but he never could be productive or work in school. One day, some Hitlerite people came, took him out of the village and said they would take him to a camp to grow up. And nobody thought anything of it, but we never, ever, nobody ever saw him again. Neither his parents nor we, his school friends, nobody saw him again. Hitler apparently did not put up with mentally disturbed people. They were dispensable.
Were there any Jewish people in your village?
No, but in the next door village, there were. My village, we were all Catholic. Oh my gosh, were we Catholic. Ooh. Our village was run by the village priest, not by the Burgermeister, the mayor. It was the village priest. And when I was 16, 17, I got into it with the village priest because I didn't like his sermons. Because every Sunday when my mother went to church. We all had to go, of course. When she came home, she cried. And I thought, something isn't right. Why can't my mom come home and feel better after church than when she did when she went to church? But this priest just instilled the fear of the flames of hell in that was awaiting all of us, whatever. None of us could do enough to earn heaven. So I got into trouble with him.
Let me ask you, Irmgard, were there any shortages, or, did life change in the sense that you had to now work with your dad gone, or was there, not enough food all the time, or anything like that?
Well, that was absolutely not so much the first year, but it soon started. I was 11 and I just went to the farmers every day. First I was babysitting. Then I went out with the farmers and worked. And maybe at night the big thing for us was to eat at night, for instance, potatoes and sour milk. Well, we had neither a cow. We grew a couple of potatoes, but not enough to last. So the farmers would give me just about something that we could eat at night. My brother next to me, who was a year younger, you could not get him interested to go out with the farmers. He went and worked where they repaired cars. He was sort of interested, taking things apart, never to put them back together again. We had a gramophone. He took it apart. There was 1,000 pieces. Oh, he was going to put it back. No, he never put it back. But he went and worked. Eventually, somebody took him to a garage where he could learn to work on cars. He busied himself that way. Then the next one was my sister. We all went with somebody speaking.
No, that's okay. Keep on going.
My sister, we all went out with the farmers as much as we could to bring home some food. And what I missed the most, and what really I still have in memory, what hurt me, were my feet, because I couldn't buy or get shoes, because we were told, well, you're not farmers. You don't get an allotment for shoes. We need the allotments for the children of the farmers. They got to go out with the farmers. That I did the same than every other child in order to eat. It just didn't count. It wasn't there. So we had eventually somebody in the village who made shoes out of tires, old car tires. They were the connective part to wooden parts, 3 things on the bottom connected with these rubber things and nails and whatever. Oh, but my feet hurt in those things. They hurt. When other children could go to school, come home from school, go out to work, have shoes, we didn't have shoes. That's what really bothered me a lot.
So you did go to school. What was school like?
Well, as I said, it was the same teacher. Eventually, I think he just went too far and he had to be removed. And we got a lady teacher. And I immediately was friends with a lady teacher. And when we had a chicken farm outside the village. And there was a sort of we called him an Einsiedler, a man that didn't bother with the village people or anybody else. He lived up there and had his, I don't know how many hundreds of chickens. He had they were all fenced in. He married this lady that was a school teacher in the neighboring village, eventually then taught school in our village. And I loved her. I just loved her. She put me in charge. I had to teach the first and the second grade.
That's why you loved her, because she put you in charge.
She made me a boss. Totally. That's why I'm still bossy. And I sat out on the steps. There were stony steps, cold on the butt, you know. We were sitting on the steps in the sunny days, a little outside, and I taught reading and writing, but mostly arithmetic. So when I came of age to go to a special school, I flunked arithmetic because I only knew first and second at the best third grade arithmetic. I missed my classes. That's what I was teaching. So I almost flunked out of that school. And they said, okay, we give you 3 months. You wrote such an impressive essay why you wanted to be here that we can't just let you go. We give you 3 months. I got special arithmetic training and I made it. I stayed at the school. For girls, for 4 years, I went to a specialty school for girls only.
What did you know about Hitler, and what did people say in your neighborhood or in your village about Hitler?
About Hitler, it was hush, hush. Nobody came out and say, oh, he's a great man. Oh, he's doing that. But every Sunday, eventually, as the war went on, Hitler had a habit, or whoever put out these rules, we blamed everything on Hitler. The rule was at 10 o'clock in the morning, the Hitler Youth was to march. Well, Sunday, 10 o'clock in the morning was church time. So nobody in the village cared. We just all went to church and marched after church. Eventually, I became a BDM leader. I was 13 years old, and there were only 4 or 5 girls in the village that marched with me. And I did the sports. I didn't know much of anything else. I didn't know. In school, we eventually got a teacher. Oh, I forgot about him. Oh my goodness, yeah. He wore the SS uniform to school. And he had boots up to his knees. And in the boots stuck a whip, which was pliable, and on the end, the big long string, which was a form of leather. So when he hit the boys across the legs. I never got hit by him. But I then already was a great storyteller. And he would sit on the top of my desk, and he said to me, what did you dream last night? If I didn't have a dream, boy, I hurried up and made one up. I wanted to impress him with my stories. I wanted to stay on the good side, and I always was. I never got to feel the whip, never, from him. But we had a boy who stuttered. He got hit across the legs. I think that's why he stuttered. He later on in life, he was my age. He wanted to marry me. He got my first marriage proposal from him when I was 17, and I laughed my head off. I thought that was so funny, and he felt so hurt. I still see the look on his face, but we remained,
I guess so.
we remained friends till he died. Yeah.
I was gonna ask Irmgard a question about Würzburg. People don't realize, well, if anybody's been to Würzburg is a very heavy wine country. I don't know if Irmgard had wine vineyards in her area, but if you took the Allegheny and Monongahela valleys, and you took the southern slope of the Monongahela, which is a high cliff there, and you took the Allegheny on the north side and ran vineyards up and down, that's what the Main River looks like at Würzburg. It's all vineyards, and it's all white wine, and it's a great. I tell you, you get spoiled on the white wine in Würzburg. You're spoiled.
That was always a big feast when the Weintrauben got picked. They hired extra people. Everybody went to pick Trauben, and they got dumped into a big barrel. I was no longer over there then. I was over here. But my sister-in-law, who only last year died at the age of 89, she didn't miss 1 year, she was right there climbing up these steep hills with the bucket on the back, putting the grapes in, and then they got dumped onto a big truck. The truck moved in, they had the wineries there, lots of, at least 3 or 4 big wineries on the outskirts across the river of Würzburg, and they ground down everything, the worms, everything went down with it. Made good wine.
Well, to get back to the war, Irmgard, this dress that you're in here, Hitler Youth dress?
Yes.
Okay.
It had a little bolero with it, and it was white. And I just can't remember how I got the dress, but I know why I got the dress. In Markteidenfeld, about 7 kilometers away from my village, Roden, Markteidenfeld was on the river, Main River. They had the Maifest, the 1st of May, and they had the Maibaum, a May tree, and we danced around the tree, and they chose from the surrounding areas special girls. I was special. That's why I got that dress and those 2 strings of hair. That's not all my hair. There are about 6 more of them hanging down my back. That was my pride and joy, this hair. I just twirled it, washed it and twirled it like this around my fingers, and that's the way it went.
Great.
And
Oh, great.
against the mighty tree, yeah.
I love this picture. Here you are in the middle with the accordion.
They're all
Tell us,
dead.
yeah, tell us about the people in this picture.
They were all, I mean, everybody in the village was my friend. Nobody else played the accordion but me. And thanks to my dad, I had that accordion. And I have the exact same thing that you see here. I'll be playing later here. It's not the same accordion, but it's the number 2, the same one my dad sent me for over here. This was the best looking boy, the one all the way on the right. He was the best looking guy, about 3 years older than me. The 2 in the back of me, they were 5 years older in the war. The one all the way on the left, there was something the matter, I'm not sure what it was. He didn't pass to be drafted, but he died as a young man of something. I'm not sure. The one right away in the back died in the war. The second one died in the war. The one all the way on the right came back. His name was Ernst. He married a girl from, as a matter of fact, he married the one man on here, his sister. They lived a happy life in the village, but the other one in the back died soon after he was drafted. But I played in the village bar. I was maybe 16 here. I was fat. You see my cheeks, I was fat. And we were on the way home, walking home one night, and the priest who ran the village pretty much looked out, and these 4 guys were always, when they were home, I played. When they were around, I played in the village bar, welcoming them home. And
because they were home, they were soldiers, they were home on
leave.
furlough, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3 of them on leave, but that was so rare that they were all 3 there, and then in civilian clothes. You know, it just didn't happen. But big celebration, and I would go in to play the song I played a little later. Erika, we were singing that song. I don't remember exactly. But the priest in the village was very unhappy with my performances in the village bar. And the following Sunday, after this, somebody took this picture. He didn't name me by name, but he announced from the pew in church that surely as heck I would go to hell for all the sins I was committing by being with all these guys. But you know, what were we doing? We were singing, we were doing something that you didn't hear anymore in those days of the war. Who had something to play with? We didn't have music. We had no bands. These guys were happy, and everybody was happy. But the priest didn't like it. He didn't like me.
Now
My goodness.
I love this picture.
I do. Look at my fat legs. And you know what the village boys called them? Butter barrels. They called my legs butter barrels all the time. And that was so offensive to me.
Absolutely offensive.
Yeah, I thought I had all right legs, you know. Of course, with those white knee-high home knitted socks, they were fatter yet, you know. But that was when I went to the special school in Lower.
And who was the guy? Who's the soldier here?
The soldier was an injured infantryman from the German army who was recuperating in a, what do you call it, a hospital for GIs, for the German soldiers. And as a part of good deed, once a week, I took my accordion and I went into that hospital and I played for the soldiers. And this one here played the piano like you never heard before. When he played the piano, I melted. I just melted. But to show how stupid I was at that age, apparently had a great interest in me. But that went by me. That I did not see. I just saw a friendship, a great friendship. It never developed into anything else. But this is a pile of wood that was stashed next to the river, and it was my favorite place. I would climb up there and do my school studies. And this was probably on a weekend when I didn't have to go to school. And we met there and sat up on that house, and he got up there. He had one leg all shot up. But he was up there with me. And on the back of it, I think it's a picture where he said, "Heil Hitler."
Yeah, let me show you that. Let me show everybody the back of this picture.
Yeah. And I wrote that on there. Die letzten Tage in Lower, I wrote them the last few days in Lower, where I went to the all-girls school. Then I wrote next to it later, after I was here, right before American troops moved in. I was already in America. Herzlichen Gruß, that's his writing. Carl, that was his name. And below it, he says, Heil Hitler. So we were obviously, anybody with any kind of brain. So we weren't only losing the war, we had lost it. But he still wrote Heil Hitler, and I believed right there, Hitler would put out the promised, he promised this rocket. He was developing this rocket, and he was going to annihilate England because they were bombing us so much. Of course, it never happened.
So you found it hard to believe that Germany could possibly lose the war.
I just kept up the hope, and I couldn't let that hope die in me. We couldn't lose the war. It just didn't. And when you saw soldiers like that, you know, they believed the same way. Then my mother, a day or two later, after the picture was taken, she sends a little farmer with a little old dilapidated looking horse, comes 21 kilometers up to Lower Mine. Maybe this gentleman there, Jeff, knows where Lower Mine was. That's where I went to school. And that little wagon comes in front of where I was living, Says, your mom wants you home immediately. Pack up your clothes. I threw everything in a suitcase, got on that wagon, went home, and told the soldiers in that hospital, if, I don't think the Americans will come here, but if the Americans come here and you need to flee, you will always have a home at my mother's house. That I just said that, and 2 of them showed up,
And they did show up.
and he was among them.
He was one of them. So these were German soldiers who didn't want to be taken as prisoner by the Americans, so they put on civilian clothes and went and hid
No,
out.
they came in their uniform.
They came in their uniform.
And then the Americans were in front of the door. He came and knocked on my door, and I thought I would die. We said, we got to get civilian clothes, and nothing fit him in my house. My dad was a big man. I had to go around and beg the farmers, I know you have a son in the war, can I get a pair of pants and a jacket or something? And we hid him in a hay barn. And the one took off, the younger one took off. He said he didn't live that far. He could get home. I don't know what happened to him, but Carl stayed in my village for a couple of months.
Mm.
And we hid him in a hay barn.
I was going to comment about the strategic importance of Würzburg. I don't know if Irmgard was aware of it, but up on the top of the hill, east of the eastern part of Würzburg is the airfield, the Luftwaffe airfield.
Yes.
On top of the bluff, and that's where they had their headquarters for one of their squadrons up there and everything. And that was a very, very important base. That became the headquarters of the 3rd Infantry Division after the war. That was Leighton Barracks.
For many years.
Yeah, we used to be on the runway. That's where used to be our physical training and run the runway up there on top of the bluff up there. And I don't know if you all know it, but the 3rd Infantry Division, that was Audie Murphy's division. So that he came out of southern France and went into Germany at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. Irmgard, I want to show this picture once again because you have a story, a wonderful story, harrowing one about, I think, studying on that log pile by the river in Loire, and a British.
Carl.
Excuse me.
Not Carl was not present then.
Yeah, not with Carl, by yourself, and a British fighter plane came swooping down.
That was, I am not sure, but it must have been right before we finally capitulated. But before I left Loire, before my mother sent that dilapidated horse to draw the wagon with me on it home, we had end of the years, we had to hurry up and get the last final studies in so they could give us the final papers that we graduated from that school. So I always climbed up on there, and right down here was the road where people rode their bicycles on it. On the other side was the Main River, and on the one side was Loire, on the other side was another little village. So the river was in between, and I was right here. You would be facing the river. In the back of me was one side of the village. And I was up there, and in the middle of the day, there were no sirens, nothing. That little English plane flew along the Main River where our flak could not detect him. He flew too low to be shot at. So he felt safe to fly the riverbed, and there was manned. They came almost every day, but not so much in the daytime. And I'm sitting up there, and this plane comes, flies over me, and honestly, so low, I see the young flyer in there, but it was just, he was past me. He comes down another couple of feet, not very much, and there was a ferry on the river, a farmer with his cows. He had cows, not horses, and whatever he had on his wagon, I don't know, and a couple of people on the ferry. Well, anyhow, the people on the ferry, he shot the cow on the ferry, and the people jumped in the river. I'm not quite sure what all happened there, but he turned around and came back, and I figured he's coming for me. I couldn't imagine he didn't see me up there. However, we had learned, and that was embedded in my head, don't sit upright, don't stand up, duck down, go. So I was hiding down in between the logs, but I could still peek up. And I see this plane from turning around down at the river, coming toward me, and I see this young face, a very young soldier, and the cap, the leather cap he was wearing, I don't know why I remember that so much. He didn't have the strings tied in the front. They were flying. Those strings were flying. He went past me on the road. This stupid woman was taught differently. Do not move when a plane is in the area. She was on a bike, and why would she think she would outrun this? The guy shot the woman off of the bike. He shot her in the legs. He didn't kill her. She lived, but she could have just thrown her bike next to the street in a
ditch.
In a ditch and be safe, But I remember that's the only time in my life I went to confession, and the priest so often told me I would wind up in hell, and I didn't repent enough, and I was a bad girl. But that day, I figured I would die. And I don't know that I folded my hands, but I remember every sin I ever did went past. Like this through my head, like a fast-moving video. And I said, Lord, forgive me. Please forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was stupid. I don't know what all I said. I said a lot of stuff I never said again since. And I didn't get killed. There I am to tell the story.
And we're so glad you're here to tell this story. We have about 10 minutes left, Irmgard, and I do want you to tell the story because I think it's so wonderful of how you met your husband after the war.
Oh my goodness. I worked in Aschaffenburg. Jeff, you know Aschaffenburg, I'm sure. Because of my language knowledge, I could speak English. Other than that, I would not have had a right to work in Aschaffenburg because Aschaffenburg was bombed.
Okay. Yeah.
But the American families who had taken up living quarters there needed maids. We were all called maids. And they preferred people who could speak English. But I spoke English, like 6:30. But I somehow, because they had living quarters in their own apartments there on the 6th floor, I did not have to take a living space away from anybody else in town. I was allowed to work in Aschaffenburg. So now I'm up in that thing, and now I'm working for Southern Baptists. They went to church every Sunday. That was my second job, actually, working for Americans. He was a CID officer, Central Intelligence, and I worked in his household.
Irmgard, question, Irmgard, how did you end up in Aschaffenburg's like an hour east or west of Würzburg? That's to the west. And I just wondered how you ended up in Aschaffenburg.
From the village, through the village, like my dad wanted to run that route because he was saying, when my dad came back, he wanted that route to travel with the bus, but somebody else had that route. So they came from the village. There were workers that went to Aschaffenburg to help rebuild Aschaffenburg, which was bombed out. Okay. And I got onto that bus to be down there. But then I had living quarters up there, so I didn't have to go back. I went only back, I had to go to be interviewed, and the knowledge of my English language got me the job, and I stayed there and worked. And every Sunday I had to work till 11:30, because my boss, the CID officer, Mr. Morton, was a Sunday school teacher, and so was his wife. So I only was free after Sunday school to have my Sunday. So I was walking down through town late in the afternoon on a Sunday, and I wanted to see, somebody said, oh, they thought a train might be running by now, the train station, everything was bombed. I wanted to see if the train was running. So I took a walk down there, and as I entered the train station, I saw two GIs. We called American soldiers GIs. And one was I knew later, a Mexican guy, and my husband. And I looked, and I had coffee cans under their arms. And my husband had two under his arm. And the little Mexican guy was shorter, he only had one. And I had a funny feeling, the way the one guy looked at me. I would come out of the station and he might still be there, sure enough. Now it started to get dark, I could not. I wanted to walk through the cemetery, which was a shortcut back home to my living quarters. And I wasn't want to walk away from traffic when there was a GI sort of gauging me. Well, my husband, I went to one, it was a little store, and that was not bombed out, and little things in the window. I stopped. When I went to store number 2, my husband stopped at store number 1. On the 5th store, my husband was in the 4th store. I thought, what am I going now? There is no more stores, and he's still hanging around here. He finally walks up to me and he says in German, "Wo gehen Sie, Fräulein?" And I answer in English, "That's none of your business." And he says, "Oh, Sie speaking Sie English? Oh, to speaking Sie English. Can I buy you a drink?" And I had not looked at him. I still looked in the window, and he was standing there. And I said, "I don't drink." And when my husband said, in all honestness, he says, "Don't you ever get thirsty?" I thought, gee, that guy has a sense of humor. And I turned around, and I know I just kept looking up. He was 6'1". And I thought, oh, he ain't so bad looking either. He doesn't look bad. And I said, yeah, I get thirsty. What do you drink when you get thirsty? Now I'm thinking really hard. And I say, I drink milk. Didn't drink. Nobody in Germany drinks. As you know, Jeff, who goes to a bar and drinks milk? We don't drink milk.
That reason wine.
You know. So I said something that I figured he can't get for me. So he said, "Oh, I'll buy you a glass of milk. Will you come with me?" I said, "Where are you going to take me?" Right around the bend was not a commissary. What did the GIs hang out in?
PX.
PX or the
Started with a G, I thought. Whatever, a little hole in the wall. I said, "Oh, nothing can happen to me. I'll walk down the street with him. I'll go in there." We go in there, and there are these big signs there, red and yellow and white. And he says, "Well, what kind of milk do you want?" I thought, what kind of milk? I said, "Well, do I have a choice?" And he said, "Well, do you want chocolate? Do you want vanilla? Or do you want strawberry?" Ooh, that sounded interesting to me. So I think I said strawberry. And out comes this, these drinks like you used to get from Howard Johnson, these big, tall glasses. And out comes this big straw with something sitting on top of the straw. I drank that thing. I thought I died and went to heaven. Mm-hmm. And he drank also a milkshake. And he said, "Do you want another one?" I said, "What, another one? No, I'm full." He said, "Can I walk you home?" And I figured, oh, now we're in trouble. Because my boss, the CID officer, said, "Don't ever go anywhere at night if a GI is in the area. You never know what they're up to," because there were a few cases of rape, which often happened between white and colored folks, but there were no colored folks. But so I said, "No, you can't walk me home. Can I get you a taxi?" I said, "A taxi?" I'd never heard of somebody getting a taxi for me to get back home. I said, "A taxi? No, I don't want a taxi. I'm going to walk home." He said, "Can I have another date with you? Can I have a date with you? Not another, a date with you." I said, "Yeah, Sunday." He said, "What do you do Sunday?" I said, "I go to the 11 o'clock mass across the street." It was the American Protestant mass. By 11 o'clock, I was free. Couldn't go into the city to go to the Catholic mass. I was Catholic. I said, "I go to," and I figured church is church. It didn't matter. I went to the Protestant mass. "Okay, I'll meet you Sunday." Of course, who didn't show up was my husband. Didn't come to the mass. So I figured, well, I might as well find out what kind of a guy he is. I walked across. He told me he worked in a motor pool in the Kaserne, in a caserne right next to where I lived. So I went over there across from the church, and I happened to know the sergeant who was on guard because he was a friend of my boss's. And I said, "Sergeant so-and-so, do you know a Bob Ryan?" He said, "Oh, that's him right down there." But he was in fatigues, not in uniform. I would not have known him in fatigues.
Yeah.
And he calls him. And I said, "Oh," I said, "Nice church you went to, huh?" And he said, "Oh," and he turned almost purple. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. As you can tell, I have only one uniform and it's at the dry cleaners, and I didn't get to pick it up. I'm in fatigues and I didn't want to go to church in fatigues." So that's the first time I knew the word fatigues, what that meant. It just meant not Sunday clothes to me. And I said, okay, that's it. You stood me up." He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's make another date." I said, "No." He said, "It's raining. Can I get a taxi I said, "No, no taxi, no. I'm going to walk. I'm wet already. What does it matter?" He said, "Well, how will I meet you again?" I said, "That's up to the one up there." I said, "Whenever." And I told him my name was Elizabeth. I lied. I did not give him my name. I told him Elizabeth. So about 2 weeks later, I'm walking down the street, and there were bars that were off limits to Germans, but only Americans. Suddenly I hear behind me, "Hey, Elizabeth, hey, Elizabeth." I didn't pay any attention. I forgot, Finally, it came closer and closer that, "Hey, Elizabeth, stop, Elizabeth." I looked around, looked up again, there he was, the handsome soldier. From then on, we dated. Yeah, that's how I met him. He had sold his cans of coffee in the meantime down there on a German black market, the first meeting. In a second meeting, he won my dad's heart over. My dad hated him because my dad only saw the uniform. He didn't see the man in it. He only saw the uniform. And my dad, when I finally came and I said, I wanted his blessing to marry him, he said, "You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. I had to shoot these guys. Now you want to marry one of them? No way are you going to marry one of them." But he brought every Sunday, we loaded up the Jeep. He eventually had a Jeep with canisters of benzene, gasoline, his rations and whatever from other GIs who didn't use their rations. We brought them home to my father. That's the only way my father tolerated my husband in his house. Yeah,
It's such a great story, Irmgard. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I'm going to have you play an accordion song to close us out. But I do want to thank you for being on, Irmgard. And I also want to thank Carole and Jan for being on and talking a bit about your dad. Next week, we're going to have a special guest. You've probably never heard his name, but he's very important to me. His name is Eric Carole. He is a designer of rubber ducks for Oriental Trading Catalog. And he's the man who pretty much on his own discovered that Harold Schultz was in the Iwo Jima flag raising photograph. He did detective work over years to prove that John Bradley was not in the photograph, but Harold Schultz was. And as you can imagine, this is earth-shattering. The Marine Corps denounced Eric Carole and said, no, his research isn't valid, but eventually had to come around and acknowledge that Carole was right. It's really an interesting story of the research, the kind of forensic research into the photographs that he did. I've really traced what he's done. And I've lectured on, and I'm a professional historian. And what I say is, this is an amateur who did it on his own. He caught what all of us missed because we just took for granted what we were told. But he didn't take it for granted. He did the research, and he's agreed to be on the program. And I would love to have 2 Iwo Jima veterans with us. So Jack Watson, I've asked Jack to be on with us, and I've asked Larry Kirby to be on with us. And so we're going to really look at that most famous photograph, the Iwo Jima photograph taken by Joe Rosenthal in February 1945. And we're going to examine the heck out of it and talk about the people who are in the photograph. It's a wonderful story. So that's next week, next Sunday. Tomorrow night, we have our Veterans Breakfast Club happy hour. I hope you'll join us at 7 p.m. because it is trivia night. We're doing trivia night. Ellie and I have been coming up with questions. Sean Hall's been coming up with questions. This is going to be a lot of fun. Please do join us. But Irmgard is going to close us out with a German song called Erika.
Yeah.
What is Erika?
Erika is in this song, primarily the first verse is talking about a flower. And the flower translated, I think, vulgaris. That's it. That is the Lüneburger Heide. When that stuff grows, it kills everything else. So it talks about this flower. But the second verse, Erika is also a lady, it's a girl's name. The second verse talks about the girlfriend, Erika. The reason I chose this song is because when I had my first accordion, 12, 13, 14, all these years I played Erika. The song Erika. Then I come over here. I have no accordion. My father eventually sends me. We play Erika, my sing-alongs. Erika is in there. But after the war, the American occupational troops decided to ban certain songs that had Hitlerite influence. And we all laughed with Germans. Now remember, we had no TV. We only had sound of Hitler and whatever, or maybe a picture. So when we heard Erika, the song, we heard SS troops marching. We heard boom, 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 the marching sound of lots of feet. And the band did, there was nothing in that song that was politically influential, nothing whatsoever. But I played it in the backyard all the time. And the people, we sang it because nobody listened. But I tried to explain this. My little accordion only goes so low. I can't sing this song as high. So I have to do the best I can, playing an octave higher than I sing. I can't sing as high as my accordion plays it, and I can't play as long as the song needs it. So whatever happens, I'm sorry. Okay, that's a go. Auf der Heide blüht ein kleines Blümelein. Das heißt Erika, heißt von 100.000 kleinen Blümelein. Mit dem Schwanzapfel Erika, denn ihr Herz ist voller Süßigkeit. Zarte Düfte, Blütenkeit. Auf der Hand blüht ein kleines Blümelein. Das That's it.
That's great.
That's it.
Wonderful job, Irmgard. Thank you so much for
You were
sharing.
supposed to march with it. I
Oh,
forgot to tell you.
When we could get together in person, we'll all goose step
March,
around the
yes.
room. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly the way we should.
Next
That's
time
very-
we have breakfast at the Methodist Church in Bethel Park. We all march to Erika.
I was just going to comment. That's very similar to the Ponzer song, the song of the tankers. The tankers. That's very similar to that. The tanker song.
Very similar to the tanker song. That's interesting. Irmgard, thank you so much for sharing that wonderful story. And I do want everybody to keep in mind that when we ask people to come on and share their story, we might talk for an hour, but keep in mind, we're getting this much of the story. I mean, think about how much Irmgard has left out, about how much Carole and Jan had to leave out. There are always more stories and more to the story than we could get to. That's why we have another one. So I hope that's why we have another program. So I hope you'll come next week, Greatest Generation Live. Thank you guys. Have a good rest of the weekend. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Nobody
Yeah.
catch the virus.